Hello, it's Willie from the Ozarks and ready for our December the 9th lesson in A Course in Miracles workbook for students. Lesson 343. I am not asked to make a sacrifice to find the mercy and the peace of God. I am not asked to make a sacrifice to find the mercy and the peace of God. The end of suffering cannot be loss. The gift of everything can be but gain. You only give, you never take away, and you created me to be like you, and you created me to be like you. So sacrifice becomes impossible for me as well as you. I too must give, and so all things are given unto me forever and forever. As I was created, I remain. Your Son can make no sacrifice, for he must be complete, having the function of completing you. I am complete because I am your Son. I cannot lose, for I can only give, and everything is mine eternally. The mercy and the peace of God are free. Salvation has no cost. It is a gift that must be freely given and received. And it is this that we would learn today. So if you want something from God, we must be able to give it. I think about what Yogananda said once to one of his disciples, that if there's something that you want in your life, be sure that you are giving that to everybody that you can, because that's how you get it into your life. He understood these principles, even though he was not, the Course in Miracles hadn't yet been given to the world in his day. I am not asked to make a sacrifice to find the mercy and the peace of God. And this is the idea that we want to bring to our minds today, is that there's no sacrifice that's needed in order to get God's treasures. And if you think there is a sacrifice, it's just because you're looking at things upside down. All right, I am not asked to make a sacrifice to find the mercy and the peace of God. Let us take a look in our text reading, and we're ready for the dynamics of the ego, which is in chapter 10, God and the Ego, section 6, the dynamics of the ego. And as you're turning there, let me tell you about a lettuce that I'm kind of liking. I grow this most years, and it's butter crunch lettuce, a real common lettuce. It's a 65-day lettuce. I'm reading this out of the Baker's Creek catalog. Classic butterhead type was the standard for many years. Soft, buttery textured leaves enclose a crisp, juicy, loose inner head of blanched, sweet-tasting leaves. Very heat-tolerant and slow to bolt. Buttercrunch stays mild long after others have turned bitter. Developed by George Raleigh at Cornell University and an All-American selection for 1963. Whatever that was, the All-American selection of 1963. All right. So, buttercrunch lettuce. The dynamics of the ego. No one can escape from illusions unless he looks at them, for not looking is the way they are protected. Catch that? It's by not looking is how you keep the ego intact. No one can escape from illusions unless he looks at them, for not looking is the way they are protected. There is no need to shrink from illusions, for they cannot be dangerous. We are ready to look more closely at the ego's thought system because together we have the lamp that will dispel it. And since you realize you do not want it, you must be ready. Do you realize you do not want it? Let us be very calm in doing this. Let us be very calm in doing this. For we are merely looking honestly for truth. The dynamics of the ego will be our lesson for a while, And the word dynamics are in quotes because there's really no dynamo in there. There's no life, there's no reality. It's an appearance. The dynamics, in quotes, of the ego will be our lesson for a while, for we must look at this to look beyond it, since you have made it real. We will undo this error quietly together and then look beyond it to truth. I want to point out a little caution here, or a little, just be aware that this, you don't want to be focusing on what is not real and then proving to yourself that you now have to let it go or forgive it. All he's wanting us to do is calmly look at what we've made so that we can let the light of truth dispel it. We don't want to be overly devoted to trying to understand the ego, because remember, in reality, the ego is not understandable. But if you believe that it is, well, then it's understandable to that degree. So we're trying to let our beliefs be in alignment with the light of truth. Okay? So he'll explain this a little better. What is healing but the removal of all the What is healing but the removal of all that stands in the way of knowledge? And how else can one dispel illusions except by looking at them directly without protecting them? Be not afraid, therefore, for what you will be looking at is the source of fear. But you have surely learned by now that fear is not real. Okay, have we learned that much, that fear is not real? It's an imagination, it's a belief. And we want to look at it long enough to know that it is that belief and that we can change our mind and let truth lead us. We have accepted the fact already that its effects can be dispelled merely by denying their reality. The next step is obviously to recognize that what has no effects does not exist. Laws do not operate in a vacuum, and what leads to nothing has not happened. If reality is recognized by its extension, what extends to nothing cannot be real. 41. Do not be afraid then to look upon fear, for it cannot be seen. Clarity undoes confusion by definition, and to look upon darkness through light must dispel it. Let us begin this lesson in ego dynamics, which is in quotes, because there again, the ego has no dynamics. It's an illusion. It's not real. Let us begin this lesson in quotes, ego dynamics, by understanding that the term itself does not mean anything. In fact, it contains exactly the contradiction in terms which makes it meaningless. Dynamics implies the power to do something, and the whole separation fallacy lies in the belief that the ego has the power to do anything. The ego is fearful to you because you believe this. Yet the truth is very simple. And here's the truth. All power is of God. What is not of Him has no power to do anything. Now that might be one to say several times and really let it settle in. All power is of God. What is not of Him has no power to do anything. All power is of God. And what is not of Him has no power to do anything. That reminds me of the Seed of the Soul book, and Gary Zukav talks about authentic power. And this is what I would call authentic power. All power is of God. What is not of Him has no power to do anything. 43. When you look at the ego, then, we are not considering dynamics, but delusions. Okay, so but you do want to see them long enough to lay them on the altar and to forgive them, to give them to God. You want to at least know what you're thinking is what He's trying to get us to see here. Not that it's real, not that it's understandable, but that you're believing it. Very, very important that you allow what you think to come to your mind. That's why it's so important to have these quiet times during the day and to just accept truth exactly as it is. Just accept what is. The truth will settle itself. It'll come to the top like cream comes to the top. After you milk a cow, the cream comes to the top. Well, the truth will come to the top if you give it a chance. But a lot of us just stay wrapped up in our ego beliefs and deny what's really true, so we never get to see it. And that's all he's trying to get us to do, is just calm down long enough and look at what you're thinking so that you can begin to see what's true and not live your life on illusions. 43. When we look at the ego, then, we are not considering dynamics but delusions. We can surely regard a delusional system without fear, for it cannot have any effects if its source is not true. Fear becomes more obviously inappropriate if one recognizes the ego's goal, which is so clearly senseless that any effort exerted on its behalf is necessarily expended on nothing. The ego's goal is quite explicitly ego autonomy. Okay, the ego's goal is quite explicitly ego autonomy. Let's look at, what does the word autonomy mean? I mean, we've used that word several times, but I looked it up just so that we could get a real clear definition. And it's the right or condition of self-government. All right? So ego autonomy is the ego saying, I have the right to decide how to govern myself. And that's an illusion. But it can believe that. So the ego's goal is quite explicitly ego autonomy. From the beginning, then, its purpose is to separate, sufficient unto itself, and independent of any power except its own. This is why it is the symbol of separation. 44. Every idea has a purpose, and its purpose is always the natural extension of what it is. Everything that stems from the ego is the natural outcome of its central belief. And the way to undo its results is merely to recognize that their source is not natural, being out of accord with your true nature. And what is the ego's source? Separation. And it wants to cause this separated self to be autonomous, have its own self-governing ability. We once said that to will contrary to God is wishful thinking and not real willing. His will is one because the extension of his will cannot be unlike itself. The real conflict you experience then is between the ego's idle wishes and the will of God, which you share. Can this be real? Can this be a real conflict? 45. Yours is the independence of creation, not of autonomy. Yours is the independence of creation, not autonomy. Your whole creative function lies in your complete dependence on God, whose function he shares with you. By his willingness to share it, he became as dependent on you as you are on him. Do not ascribe the ego's arrogance to him, who wills not to be independent of you. He has included you in his autonomy. So God has included you in his autonomy. Matter of fact, he says he's not complete without you because he made you as part of him and always sees you as the extension of him and completely in need of you. So we want to see the same towards God. Can you believe that autonomy is meaningful apart from God? Can you believe that autonomy is meaningful apart from him? The belief in ego autonomy is costing you the knowledge of your dependence on God, in which your freedom lies. That's your independence, your freedom. But that's the independence of creation, which is in harmony and complete allegiance and cooperation with God. And that's what we want, not that separate thinking that we're fighting against nature and God and that we have to maintain a separate identity. The ego sees all dependency as threatening and has twisted even your longing for God into a means of establishing itself. But do not be deceived by its interpretation of your conflict. And I think we probably should stop there. And where is my pen so I can mark that? Well, I've dropped my pen. Okay, well, we'll go on. We'll mark it in a little bit. We'll be ready tomorrow for paragraph 46. The ego always attacks on behalf of separation, is how that paragraph begins. All right, now let's go back and take a look at our reading for today under I am not asked to make a sacrifice to find the mercy and the peace of God. And it is, what is a miracle? A miracle is a correction. It does not create nor really change at all. It merely looks on devastation and reminds the mind that what it sees is false. It undoes error, but does not attempt to go beyond perception, nor exceed the function of forgiveness. Thus it stays within time's limits, yet it paves the way for the return of timelessness and love's awakening, for fear must slip away under the gentle remedy it gives. A miracle contains the gift of grace, for it is given and received as one, and thus it illustrates the law of truth the world does not obey, because it fails entirely to understand its ways. A miracle inverts perception, which is upside down before, and thus it ends the strange distortions that were manifest. Now is perception open to the truth. Now is forgiveness seen as justified. Forgiveness is the home of miracles. The eyes of Christ deliver them to all they look upon, in mercy and in love. Perception stands corrected in His sight, and what was meant to curse has come to bless. Each lily of forgiveness offers all the world the silent miracle of love, and each is laid before the Word of God upon the universal altar to Creator and creation, in the light of perfect purity and endless joy. The miracle is taken first on faith, because to ask for it implies the mind has been made ready to conceive of what it cannot see and does not understand. Yet faith will bring its witnesses to show that what it rested on is really there. And thus the miracle will justify your faith in it and show it rested on a world more real than what you saw before, a world redeemed from what you thought you saw. Miracles fall like healing rain from heaven on a dry and dusty world, where starved and thirsty creatures came to die. Now they have water. Now the world is green. And everywhere the signs of life spring up to show that what is born can never die, and what has life has immortality. All right. And our lesson again in lesson 343, I am not asked to make a sacrifice to find the mercy and the peace of God. And the prayer says, the end of suffering cannot be loss. The end of suffering cannot be loss. The gift of everything can but be gain. You only give. You never take away. We're talking to God. You only give and you never take away. And you created me to be like you. So sacrifice becomes impossible for me as well as you. We're created in God's image. I too must give, and so all things are given unto me forever and forever. As I was created, I remain. Your Son can make no sacrifice, for He must be complete, having the function of completing you. I am complete because I am your Son. I cannot lose, for I can only give, and everything is mine eternally. And the little write-up at the bottom of this lesson, the mercy and the peace of God are free. Salvation has no cost. It is a gift that must be freely given and received. And it is this that we would learn today. Let's read that once again. The mercy and the peace of God are free. Salvation has no cost. It is a gift that must be freely given and received. And it is this that we would learn today. So be sure to give what it is you would receive. And of course, we want to have peace and understanding, acceptance, love. So those are the things we give to everyone. I am not asked to make a sacrifice to find the mercy and the peace of God. Thank you so much for joining me with this devotion today. Until tomorrow, I am not asked to make a sacrifice to find the mercy and the peace of God.